launched by Limerick Writers Centre of The Golden Axe, written by poet and author Ciaran O'Driscoll. Ciaran is a celebrated poet and author residing in Limerick. A member of Aistana, he has penned numerous acclaimed works of poetry and prose, including a memoir, A Runner Among Falling Leaves. He is also actively involved in promoting literary excellence through initiatives such as the Gerald Griffin First Adult Fiction Prize. The Golden Axe marks a significant milestone for Ciaran. The book will be launched by writer Kieran Beville. First, a word from our publisher and sponsor, Dominic Taylor.
I'll just stop on the road. Thanks, Tom. I'd like to express my gratitude to all of you for coming out this afternoon to celebrate the publication of The Golden Axe, the new novella by Booker-accepted author Ciaran O'Driscoll. This new publication marks the 175th title that we have helped see into print since the inception of our community publishing project in 2009. And it also continues our aim to publish more contemporary, long-form literary fiction. This eagerly anticipated novel from Ciaran is set to captivate readers. The title holds significance, The Golden Axe. It alludes to the ancient Roman novel of the same name, which was the story of a man turned into a donkey. Similarly, in O'Driscoll's work, the protagonist undergoes personal and psychological transformation. Early reviews of the novella has described it as disturbing, heartwarming, and with generous amounts of darkly funny moments. As I mentioned, this is the 175th title published by the Limerick Writers Centre, and I don't want to give the impression that this is only a numbers game, but I believe it is a real record of what people write about today. And if not publishers like us, and if not for publishers like us, this record would be lost to future generations. Over the years, our publishing efforts have embraced a rich array of genres, from the lyrical depths of poetry to the introspective realms of memoir, the intricate tapestries of history, and now the sweeping narratives of novels. Our mission has been unwavering: to ignite and sustain a vibrant literary culture within our community by empowering writers and poets to bring their unique voices into the world in print. We champion authors from all walks of life, whether they are dedicated professionals or those who find joy and meaning in writing for personal enrichment, healing, or enlightenment. Ciaran O'Driscoll's novella is part of this mission, offering readers an intimate journey through the complexities of human connections. In many ways, this work reminds me of Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. While the two novels differ in terms of plot and setting, they share thematic elements and explore similar psychological and moral dilemmas. And through Ciaran's prose, readers are invited to share in the protagonist's transformative moments. At the Limerick Writers Centre, it is our belief that writers should have the opportunity, if they so wish, to see their dedication and creative spirit take shape in the form of a published work. When someone starts writing, or indeed any kind of a project, it is filled with inner possibilities. But without outside help, projects can lose energy, fade away, and change direction. This is where the Limerick Writers Centre can help and push the project to complete the octave. Despite the pessimists who once declared the end of the printed book, we find ourselves in an era where the appetite for tangible literature remains hearty and robust. Bookshops continue to fill their shelves, libraries to catalogue new titles, and publishers to champion the printed word. Books endure as a formidable conduit for conversation and cultural exchange. Their technology may be old, but their ability to connect us is still cutting edge. And of course, when you open a physical book, there are no pop-up ads. And when you close it, there are no notifications to invade your privacy. I'm grateful to you all for gathering here to partake in this celebration with Ciaran's family and friends. And remember, we are a community press, And all our books are collaborations with our authors. So when you buy Kieran's book, you're not only supporting him, but other authors also. Before I finish, I would just like to say a word of thanks to, first of all, William O'Neill here at the People's Museum. A special word of thanks to our book designer, Lot Bender, for her amazing work for us over the years. And last but not least, all our wonderful volunteers who help keep the show on the road. Very much.
Thank you very much, Dominic. Kieran Beville is a poet and writer from Limerick. He has had a substantial number of poems and articles published in various newspapers, journals and magazines, and 5 collections of poetry from Revival Press. Kieran Beville
Hello everybody. Nice to see a good turnout as well. It's an honour for me to launch this excellent work of fiction by the experienced and esteemed author Ciaran O'Driscoll. And thank you, Ciaran, for bestowing this honour on me. And I trust that I will do the work justice, as the justice that the launch deserves. Just some preliminary remarks. You know, there are writers in this room and experienced readers, but just preliminary remarks about the novel as a genre of literature. Certain constituent elements are required: an engaging plot, realistic characters, good dialogue, setting the scene, creating atmosphere, and these parts are interconnected. For example, the dialogue advances the plot, it reveals character, etc. And of course, this is not a lecture on how to write a novel. Rather, it's a personal response to a particular work. And of course, the novel is more than the sum of its parts as well. It's an organic thing. It's something that has lived in the mind of the author, was crafted and developed with great skill into a work of art. There are good novels and bad novels, I'm sure you will agree, and lots of work that would come somewhere between those polarities in the spectrum. And that, of course, to some extent is a subjective opinion. But one thing I will say about a good novel is that it is both unique and universal, rooted in the particular, but resonating with a wide variety of readers. And so it is with The Golden Ass. It's written in English, but I believe it deserves to be translated into other languages so that it may be read as widely as possible. Some novels, just like some movies or plays, have an agenda to inform or to persuade. I prefer novels that are engaging and entertaining, yet have something important to say, but not in a preachy way. And The Golden Ass, in my humble opinion, is such a work. I want to read the opening paragraph of the work, but before that, in the title page, The Golden Ass is flagged as or signposted as an entertainment. And I certainly found it very interesting, very erudite, not in a scholastic way, but in a learned way nonetheless. And but most of all, I found it very entertaining, and I found myself laughing out loud at some parts of this novel. I'm not too sure I was laughing at the parts I should be laughing at, but anyway, that's really another matter. And so let me just read the opening paragraph. Martin was married with 3 children, living in a house in a Parisian suburb, a teacher with a small network of friends and colleagues, and a few students who actually admired him. He had recurrent dreams and memories of being a monk. In one of those memories, he was wearing a long religious habit, and over it an RAF greatcoat, which was as long as the habit. And he was walking to the bus that would take him back to his friary on the left bank, carrying a bag in which 2 large bottles of a famous liqueur clinked together. Well now, That opening paragraph is in the voice of the omniscient, all-knowing narrator. It's freighted with significance. It gives us the location, the profession, the form or vocation, and a kind of relationship with alcohol as well. Vivid and oral, sound and vision, we're already into a sensual experience, and curiosity is raised. Plus we have here the seminal idea that dreams and memories might play a part in the work. So this paragraph is freighted with significance. As I read on, I discovered that it was, in fact, an erudite work, not in a showy way that attracts too much attention to scholasticism, and in the process losing the prosody of the work. But it has numerous literary allusions, including biblical allusions. And if I might read something from page 2, at the top of page 2, the second paragraph. Along came a young woman for good measure, and the mystic zone's very existence was disproved. It was a form of social control to divert some of the most energetic and intelligent people from the struggle against the oppression of capitalist society. So that's quite a political statement, really. I'm not saying it's a political novel, but one reveals one's allegiances, perhaps unwittingly or intentionally, I don't know. Only Kieran can answer that. But some of the novel is set in a place called Shakespearean in the Dutch province of Friesland. And if I might come back to page 2 and 3. At present, he was in a place called Shakespearean in the Dutch province of Friesland. The very name was enough to evoke the halfway place. Sex and beer were what had put paid to his vocation. I'm glad you laughed, because this novel is filled with great humour, expertly conveyed, in my opinion. And on page 17, there's a sentence which made me laugh out loud and reminded me of Billy Connolly, because it's very eloquent, and yet you'll see when I read the sentence. Excuse me, I'm not in the humour at the moment for male Cassandras. Would you mind terribly if I asked you to fuck off? That's so funny, isn't it? You know, the juxtaposition of politeness and crudeness, if you want to call it that, with its inherent incongruity is very funny. But of course, once you start to analyse humour, it loses something in the process. So I don't want to do too much of that. I might jump forward now to page 96. And really all I'm doing here today is kind of sharing with you my engagement with this fabulous novel. And on page 96 we have Martin was giving his fellow diner a loquacious resume of his monastic temptations. That's beautifully eloquent, isn't it? And page 107, if I might just touch down again, like skimming stones. Here's a brilliant paragraph. Didn't a helicopter land one summer's day in the monastery grounds? The superior walked down to investigate this bizarre occurrence and was confronted by several armed men in balaclavas. They had hijacked the helicopter from the army for reasons best known to themselves. It was all over the papers. One of the men pointed an armalite at the superior and told him to get the fuck back into his priory. After the incident, the superior seemed to lose his zest for patrolling, whether within or outside the cloister, and this encouraged further laxity amongst the theology students. The work occasionally flits between realism and surrealism. It has some very deep psychological insights as well. Set in France, notably Paris, the Netherlands and Italy, three of my favourite places. Let me see, something on page 3. This is very Guy de Maupassant. or W. Somerset Maugham, I think. On the bench beside him he had a notebook and a weighty tome relating to the 17th century history of Holland. He had bought these in Amsterdam as a camouflage for his idleness. It had worked with his landlady. She didn't see anything wrong with the scholar staying around all day, and even offered him the uncustomary status of full board, which he gladly accepted. So, moving along, we come to this idea of the incubus. Let me see, page 3. Yes. Martin had been having regular dreams at home of being sexually abused by an incubus in his sleep, and it was becoming embarrassing, etc. Okay? And an incubus is a demon, usually in male form in folklore, that seeks to have sexual intercourse with sleeping women. The corresponding spirit in female form is called a succubus. And parallels exist in many cultures. So this seems to be a gay incubus. And I learned, it's always great when you read something to learn something as well, that there's a psychopathological disorder. I won't say too much now because I think Margaret is a psychologist. So I won't betray my ignorance here. But incubus syndrome, a disorder in which a person has strong delusions that they've been sexually approached at night by a devil or demon. This is an experience I've had myself, leaving Dolan's or the White House or the commercial late at night. There's a stirring in this, an awakening of sexual identity and orientation. Here there's a transition with the protagonist Martin. And I'm not sure whether it's something experimental or the fulfillment of a long cherished desire for that character. And although there's nothing new about such a theme, it nevertheless puts the locus of the novel at the center of contemporary issues that will resonate with many local, national and international readers. What I liked a lot about this novel was the voice of a poet coming through. And I think the whole prosody of the work really is written by a poet because it's laconic, it's terse, you have it honed to the bones. And on page 11, the voice of the poet is evident there. He says, as dawn began to tickle the curtains. On page 76, again, Martin drops his queuing ticket and it spirals downwards onto the floor like a winged sycamore seed. And it adds a kind of a piquant, if you like, to the overall stimulation and experience of the work. But it's used sparingly. I think a lot like the colour red in a painting. If it's overdone, you enter the territory of purple prose. But Kieran's prose, as I've already said, is masterfully laconic. And that terseness is conveyed with such an apparent ease that I think it took a lot of work. And there are references, of course, to several poets, notably the Romantic poets, Keats and Coleridge. And humour, as I've already said, is invariably present. When Martin returned to teaching, he attempted to foster a deep appreciation for poetry amongst his students. It says, despite opposition from the head of literature studies. Interesting. Rather than his students exclusively dissecting poetry for exam purposes, he sought to instill a love for poetry and the mystery of it. You hear the voice of the poet and the love for poetry coming through here, I believe. Page 83, he says, and so like the workers, and the humour again, and so like the workers laid off from Jacob's Dublin factory in relation to the mystery of how figs got into the fig rolls. Who cares if you read, they're gorgeous. Martin's students would bring with them to the grave the new intuitive way of appreciating poetry they had acquired, of seeing its eternal fruits in their temporal integuments. I had to admit I had to look up the word integuments, and it's an enveloping layer as a skin or a membrane or a husk of an organism or one of its parts. So I think that sentence, it demonstrates a superior power in the use of metaphorical language. Later in chapter 11, on page 93 of the novel, Martin says, "I've been trying subversively to get across to my students the conviction I hold that they may write all the mark-gaining analytical things they know about a poem and still be as far as ever from getting it, experiencing its power." And in the context here, he's applying that analogy to his experience of Hillary. Nevertheless, this is a conviction that I, as a former teacher of English literature, completely concur with. Very insightful comments as well. You have, on page 15, he says, "The most economically unpromising places are also the most aesthetically evocative." And then, of course, the Irish humour breaks through. "You can't eat scenery," as they say in Ireland. Now, there's always the question about autobiographical elements. And I think one shouldn't speculate too much. There are writers in this room. And as an author, I know that we pull threads from everywhere and weave something distinctive from them. But something that rang true for me personally was where he talks about his failed attempts to date women, disclosing too much of his religious crisis. It has a ring of authenticity, telling them that he is all right now, and them being unconvinced by that attempted reassurance. That just made me laugh out loud. Readers will speculate as to whether there are confessional elements to this work. I think Ciaran has already nailed that down and explained that it is a work of fiction, a work of imagination. But the question does arise as to whether Martin, the protagonist, is obsessed or possessed. And Ciaran deals with this superbly well in remembering a theology lesson in his seminary, where both were respectively defined and distinguished. And anyway, these delusions, whatever they are, apparitions, figments of the imagination, evil, incorporeal entities, or the emanations of an unhappy and overwrought mind, continue to be manifest. And there's also a profound analytical insight offered by way of explanation on page 18. You will find all this yourself. When I was at school, like looking around the room, like many of you of my generation, Soundings was the Leaving Cert poetry book, which has been republished, and Exploring English 1, 2 and 3. Gus Martin wrote the questions for these. And you know, like, there were right and wrong answers. There was the original intended meaning of the author, and the questions were very insightful kind of ways into the poem, really, if you read them carefully. But we've experienced a postmodern shift in terms of hermeneutics, and the response of the reader, not so much the exegesis of the text that we were encouraged to engage in, but the eisegesis, the reading into the text, has greater validity now with some limitations. There are profound philosophical questions also in this work, addressed in a deep and yet in a humorous way. Page 34 says, here we go again, what the fuck is this thing called beauty? What is this thing of beauty? And central to this work, of course, you will learn, is the idea of gender fluidity. Martin, in conversation with Sarah, says at a later stage of the novel, on page 89, isn't that what's coming to the surface these days, Sarah? That we are all fluid in various degrees. The Golden Ass, of course, is a Michelin star restaurant, but Martin also refers to Hillary's Bottom as the Golden Ass. There's a lot of common ground for me as a reader of this novel in terms of location and vocation. I'm heterosexual, and I remember a conversation many years ago with a homosexual friend who's still a great friend of mine, and who said, "Don't knock it until you try it." And my response was, "I'd be afraid to try it in case I'd like it." So you can make what you like of that, but the author refers to some songs as well, which I always like. Music's a big part of my life. And he refers to Daydream Believer by the Monkees. These are very dated, but I can see that we're not all youthful here. And I Can See Clearly Now by Johnny Nash. And if I might digress for a moment and recommend that you listen to the Hothouse Flowers version, jazz version with the superb voice of Liam O'Reilly, a superb interpretation of that song. But anyway, getting back to Ciaran and the novel, there's a clever shift from the omniscient narrative voice to the first-person singular voice by way of numerous diary entries, and this allows for greater intimacy. Page 59 tells us something about Sarah, Martin's tolerant and long-suffering wife. She's essentially a foil, a character that serves, in my opinion, as a contrast to the main character or the protagonist. The foil's personality, as you know, or traits or attributes or values or motivations, they serve to highlight the traits of the protagonist by way of contrast. If the protagonist is brave, the foil is timid, and so on. If the character is unfaithful, the foil will be one of fidelity. So she's kind of a sidekick, up to a point. I don't want to betray too much, but a person closely associated with another as a subordinate partner. But Sarah evolves. Some might say that she degenerates, but that's a very judgmental interpretation. This is, in closing, I'll just say that for me this was a thoroughly enjoyable read, superbly crafted. The poet, as I've already said, hones the prose to the bones, and the significance of the last word, Ithaca, in the novel is telling, I think. It's a Greek island in the Ionian Sea, regarded as the home of Homer's Odysseus. So please buy the book, read it, and I'm sure you will agree that it's a significant work in the canon of contemporary literature. It's been entered for the Booker Prize, that's already been mentioned, the prestigious Booker Prize. I hope indeed that it will make at least the long list, possibly the short list, and fingers and everything else crossed that it might win.
Give me the 50,000.
Very hard to follow my erudite friend there, but we'll give it a lash. Thank you very much, Kieran. During the next part, the third act, as it were, of this situation, the musicians Joe Bashford and Margaret O'Driscoll, who is not unknown to the author, will play intermittently during Kieran's reading. Ladies and gentlemen, Ciaran O'Driscoll.
Oh my God, how can I remember to bring the bin down to after that speech? How can I even think of it? Thank you very much, Kieran. And I'd like to thank Dominic as well for publishing this novel. When I got a postcard from my former literary agent to say that he didn't think anybody in Ireland would publish it, the times being what they are. And he said, God be with the old days. And thanks be to God, Dermot, that you don't have sensitivity readers. Right. Which I think, having said that, I think sensitivity readers are absolutely ruining literature. But I won't go into that now. I just have to read. I'd like to thank a number of people, especially Margaret, who has been very patient while I was living in a different world, trying to write this novel. Has really grabbed me in a way that nothing else up to now has done, I have to say. And I'd like also to thank Siobhan for her beautiful screen print, which forms the body, the main part of the cover, and also Lottie Bender for her beautiful typesetting, making this a lovely book as a physical entity. You know, I think it's a lovely book as a physical entity. And the law of gravity is a terrible thing at times.
The mantelpiece
Behind
behind
the mantelpiece.
It's disgraceful. Right, I'm going to read a passage from what I call one of the subplots of the novel. Is about a couple of Irish guys who are down and out in London, and this chapter is called Christie. Christopher Christ-bearer, uncertain as to identity or even existence, big and strong, carried the infant Jesus across the flooded river. That's the name which a young Irish emigrant to England had adopted for himself in his private reveries. Reduced to Christie in the real world, he is anyone, no one, somewhere between no one and anyone, or between anyone and someone, but definitely not somebody. Engaged in a futile search for his own importance, a tin whistle player, God help us, who has been asked to toot his flute at the BBC in Shepherd's Bush for an in-house training programme. He thought it was going to be a real programme, his big chance, but it won't go public, not even on channel 1999. It's a piece for the training archives. He gives tin whistle lessons on Tuesday evenings in an upstairs room in a pub on Fulham Broadway. The pub is called the White Hart, and it's run by a cousin of his, so he gets the room free. Luckily, seeing that he's officially unemployed, and it's a source of extra income to add to the dough. I should have let that Hillary lad go on kissing me, he thinks, looking back at what happened in Shepherd's Bush, and then suggested that he take lessons. I'm sure he would have jumped at the idea, seeing that he obviously had the hots for me, and especially when he learned that the tuition is one-on-one. I'm not so sure I'd have been able to keep his advances at bay, but I wouldn't have sneezed at the chance of earning another tenner a week. Christie lives in a squat which has not yet been cleared by bailiffs. He has a room to himself and a double bed mattress with a psychedelic quilt and some old overcoats hanging in the wardrobe for winter. That is, if he's not thrown out before the cold weather arrives. He also has a broken electric fire which he found in a skip, and it'll be grand if he can get a new element for it. He cooks for himself on a little camping gas stove. When Christie first came to the UK, he spent a few weeks working on the building site. As soon as he had enough tin whistle students to scrimp and experience, Christie gave up being a builder's labourer. Although the wages were a lot better than the income from tutoring, he no longer had to get up and be in Cricklewood at 6:30 in the morning for the van, and wrestle in the back with the spare time, tire and tools for a bit of comfort. He has this persistent idea that his full name, Christophorus, the Christ-bearer, actually implicates him in a destiny. This is an obsessional thought rather than a conviction, a cause of fantasies rather than action. He's all action in the fantasies, founding cooperatives among the unemployed, bringing the poor across the rough waters that separate the social classes. He's not even really sure if he believes in Christ, but his thoughts and fantasies are very intrusive. He now has a lot of time on his hands, time to indulge long bouts of daydreaming, with him as the hero, the Christ carrier, and even more time left over to ponder why he's doing it. He's never told any of his friends about it, not even Paddy. He keeps his mask on, the Irish emigrant's mask of the hard man. The only way this Christ-bearer obsession has seeped into reality is through his tin whistle lessons. He can see the joy he's bringing to some of his pupils as they begin to get the hang of a tune, its rhythm and phrasing, after working on it for weeks. There is a wide river to be crossed between knowing the notes of a reel and playing them so that they actually sound like a reel. A pupil comes in beaming from ear to ear, sits down and plays a tune he's been learning, and Christy asks him, "What's the difference between what you played just now and what you played last week?" The student replies, "It sounds like a reel now." And Christy says, "Well done, you've cracked it." And that's when he gets the feeling of being a Christ carrier, the sense that he has brought a person across rough waters to a happier place. He went along to Shepherd's Bush with Paddy, his Republican friend, who placed the power on. And there he met Hilary, the gay tin whistle player, who had only begun to learn the whistle, but knew the trainee producer from meeting him on the plane from Rome to London. Christy thought Hilary was so shapely he could pass for a girl, a real stunner minus the breasts. And to tell the truth, he was within a whisker of being seduced, just about preserving his macho image. When the recording session was over and they were waiting for the trainee producer to bring the pitiful contract for signing, he carried Hilary across the waters of a tune called "The Dogs Among the Bushes." "I swear I wanted to do it right there in the back room of the studio," Christy confessed to another mate, a poet friend he boozed with in the Pineapple in Kentish Town. How's me? Oh, Jesus, when I think of him, all my notions about life fly out the window. And I ask myself, what the fuck is this thing, beauty? He continued to push his lips onto mine, and when I looked over at Paddy, didn't he give me a wink? The same as if a girl was kissing me. But Christy was feeling pretty rancorous about having to bestir himself to go to what turned out to be his great non-appearance on BBC TV. He disengaged himself abruptly from the upsettingly persistent embrace, said his goodbyes and left. Paddy told him later that the shocked disappointment on Hilary's face was a sight to behold. It was as if he'd never been rebuffed by anyone before and couldn't understand it. Paddy felt sorry for him, invited him for a pint at the Shepherd and Flock. In fact, he shacked up with him for a couple of days, being the kind of bloke who doesn't particularly care what gender the eye candy is, as long as it's eye candy. Hilary invited him to stay in his plush apartment in Islington, and when Paddy asked him how he could afford such luxury, he was met with a finger to the lips. But it turned out that Hilary was a real drama queen, and when he left London for a trip back to Rome, Paddy took the opportunity to leave the flat. It was the periods in between that I couldn't stand, he told Christy, having to listen to him going on and on about himself and his allure, as he called it, about being a rent boy in Rome and how he was trying to get away from it, about how his beauty was landing him in all kinds of tight situations, about all the politicians and celebrities that fell for him at first sight, pestering me about how beautiful I thought he was, and so on for all eternity. A few weeks later, Paddy mentioned Hilary again. On a sunny day in October, when the two friends were walking back from Hampstead Heath to a bus stop, dragging their hurleys along behind them after poking a slither around in Parliament Hill Fields. Paddy plays hurling because it's an Irish thing to do. Christy tags along for the exercise. Neither of them are much good, and they'd never make it, even on the subs bench of one of the London hurling teams, which are below par compared to the teams back in Ireland. Hilary was a rent boy in Rome, a sort of super upmarket one, Paddy said, taking a swipe with his stick at a dandelion on the edge of the path. He told me how he had a client, his keeper as he called him, who sets him up in hotels and apartments whenever he takes the notion to visit a place. And that's why he was ensconced in luxury in Islington, the little brat. They stood at the bus stop beside Parliament Hill Fields, the hurleys on their shoulders like upside-down rifles. They could have been on the side of a country road at home, waiting to be picked up by their team's minibus. He has a whole ideology about his own beauty, Paddy went on. That's the choice I couldn't put up with. I wouldn't have minded the biographical stuff, but I've been thinking about that other palaver for the past few weeks. It kept coming back to me, and I find it very disturbing, Christy, very disturbing. Maybe you still have the hots for him. Ah, for fuck's sake, Christy. Paddy went into a sulk, and Christy regretted his remark. He had been getting uncomfortable, which was usual whenever his friend went into deep mode. They were skirting the zone where what disturbed Paddy didn't disturb him. It was one of those occasions when a person would want his bus to come quickly. But of course it didn't, and neither did Paddy's. They were in the mid-afternoon bus doldrums. I'm sorry, Paddy, I was being a bit flippant. Okay. Paddy turned away, still sore. If the truth must be known, Christy further conceded. I got a bit of a horn myself when he tried to kiss me. Paddy was appeased by the confession. I thought you did all right, he laughed. What is this physical beauty all about? It was meant as a harmless, rhetorical question, but Paddy furrowed his brows fiercely, and after a long pause he replied, "By God, 'tis a hard pancake, that one. A tough chestnut, all right." After another long pause he went on, "Do you know, I think he has you in his sights. A friend of mine told me his current method is to dress up as a woman and score with some half-ossified fellow. And he does unexpected calls if he gets to know an address of someone he fancied. You'll want to watch out for a late-night visit." "You're having me on," Christy grinned, and there was his bus coming in.
I'd like to, on behalf of the Writers Centre, thank everybody associated with this venture, William O'Neill and staff of the People's Museum, and the art, of course, without whom none of us would be here. We would be regurgitating the Sunday papers, God help us, or watching the match, an ancient game which traces its lineage back to Cuchulainn, but enough of that. Ladies and gentlemen, Ciaran, a little bit of useless information. We go back a long ways. Ciaran has the distinction of coming from a noble hurling county. I don't come from a noble hurling county, but I spent 5 years in what has been termed the cradle of hurling, Colosh to Ciaran on the banks of the Nore. But we did other things there as well. Anyway, many years ago, in one of his earlier literary efforts, Ciaran signed the book and drew reference, when we were both young blades at the time, he drew reference to a Herculean feat of the consumption of 2 bottles of brandy and copious pints. Sounds like fiction, no, there's hard facts. His situation regarding the current book was a reference to John Locke's. Now, to you, hurling aficionados, John Locke's is the name of a hurling team in Kilkenny. So he hasn't forgotten his roots, folks. Now, enough of that needle nor the new. All I can do, and I'll point out to you that at the back of this hall, there is a table on which there resides several literary incendiary devices under the title The Golden Ass. For Christ's sake, buy 1, buy 2, and keep Ciaran off the breadline. Keep the poor publisher off the breadline as well. And after doing all that noble work, address yourselves to the canapes and the drink. Good night.